Good morning or good afternoon, and happy holidays, everybody. I'm so glad that you made time to join me. My name is Marcia, and I'm with Minds & Associates, and we're the firm that provides your employee assistance benefit. And I encourage people, especially around this time of year when there are a lot of stresses going on, changes and challenges in the workplace, to take advantage of this resource that's provided to you by your employer. So we're going to talk today about change and transition specifically in the workplace, and I will do my best to try and make this engaging and interactive as I can. I know it's always a little bit different using a webinar as a modality. However, my hope is that this information will resonate with you and that you'll find it useful. So when we think about change and transition in the workplace, I think we can look at some of these icons and realize that once we get accustomed to certain ways of doing things, technologies to work with, it's really hard to go back. And if you remember, at least I do, when cell phones first came out, they were about the size of a small shoebox, and they were usually reserved for people that needed to be available on a minute's notice. I think about attorneys or physicians. And now around the world, you know, we've got computers that fit in our hands. It's hard to imagine going back to the old way, or even how video games are done. Think about when Pac-Man first came out, or Pong. I know I'm completely dating myself here, compared to the graphics and the strategies that are involved, and even being able to play games in a virtual world connecting to other people. So it's hard to go back to the way things used to be. And I think what this training is about is encouraging us as best as possible to find ways to not only deal with change, but to actually thrive with it. Okay, I'm trying to get to the next slide again. And it's telling me to show the control panel, but I'm not seeing how to go forward again. Oh, there we go. Okay. So my understanding is that there have been a number of changes that are going on at Heart of the Rockies. And I think changes in the workplace can include, well, you certainly have new patients at any given time that you have to learn about, become accustomed to. You have to deal with the transition when they leave the hospital. You've got changes around technology systems. I mean, this whole initiative about medical records now, my guess is you're probably there already, and smaller practices are struggling with that mandate around that change. There are changes in protocol. You have changes every time you have a new coworker join your team or a coworker who leaves the team. And then there are those changes that are made at the higher levels of the organization administratively that have to do with resource management, resource allocation, expectations. So if I were to ask you to write down your top 3 changes, I'm sure you could come up with a list of things that have a direct impact on you. And it would be interesting if you were working in a group if all of you identified the same changes. There are certain things that people pay attention to that impact them more directly. And it can be a bit overwhelming when it seems that just as soon as we were getting accustomed to doing something a certain way or working with a certain individual, oh my gosh, along comes another change. All right. So they talk about the top 10 sources of workplace stress. And my guess would be that all of you can relate to some of the things, if not all of them, that are on this list at some time in your career. And this sense of constant, relentless change, of trying to keep pace, trying to keep up, trying to adjust, ranks in the top 3. And around that, if we look at unclear policies and no sense of direction, how that communication piece gets managed has a lot to do with how people are able to react, to respond is probably a better word, to the changes that are going forward. So in addition to that, people are going to have their own opinions about whether they think it's a positive change or a negative change, or if they think it'll be a useful change, or if their feeling is, oh, been there, done that before, it didn't work, and here's why. So I just want to call attention to the fact that if people are experiencing stress around change, you're not alone. It really is one of those dimensions that a lot of people find themselves having to cope with on a regular basis. And it can be challenging for some people. It can oftentimes feel like a roller coaster ride with no end in sight. So I thought it'd be helpful to talk a little bit about the difference between change and transition. So when we think about change, it's probably easier to identify it as something that is external. Sometimes we feel it's something that happens to us. It's more visible. It's more tangible. There might be a change, for example, this is a simple one, where the way that we do reporting on our time cards has changed. We have a different company, a different vendor, a different machine, a different protocol. Or maybe we do things online differently and there's a different form to fill out. And change feels like it's something that's happening at us. So if you think about it coming from outside, it feels more rapid at times than as a event rather than a transition, which is more internal. So we think of change being the shift, and transition is the process to get us somewhere else. And sometimes the change occurs, but it really does take us a long time to really transition and effectively embrace that change, even though it might have been introduced a few months ago. Sometimes we realize that it takes us a while before we're fully on board or fully comfortable with the way things are going now. So we look at some of the characteristics of transition, and as you go through this list, think about if it resonates with you, that it sometimes feels more personal, that it affects us at a level that touches relationships, our values, our ideas, that it can be less visible. Even though we know we're experiencing something around a transition, it's not as easy to see the landmarks of it. It feels more internal and psychological, and that transition can often feel as though we're taking one step forward and then 2 steps back, which is why it can feel less predictable at times. We don't always have the time frame around when we're going to actually embrace and make the transition. So even if a new software system has a specific date for when it's being deployed, the process for us to transition to it, to feel comfortable with it, to embrace it, to feel confident, to realize the benefits, it can take 2 or 3 months down the line, especially if there are setbacks, if there are bugs in the system, if the system breaks down, if it's not delivering what we thought it would. So I hope that that resonates with you. If you can think of something that's happened in the workplace and make the distinction in your own mind between what was the change that occurred, what was the event, what was the situation, versus what was my transition around it. All right, what I'd like you to do now is I'd like to talk to you about the stages of change. And this work is based on a psychologist named William Bridges, and he is one of the founding gurus around the area of change and transition. And what he suggests to us is that there are 3 distinctive stages around change and transition, and that in order to effectively not just survive change, but to thrive with it, we have to be aware of what's entailed in each one of these arenas, each one of these phases. And his premise is that actually all changes start with endings first, and then they go through a neutral zone before we get to the beginning. And it might feel intuitively a bit backwards. Oftentimes we think about, what are you talking about? You're introducing a new change, a new way of doing something. It is the beginning. And what he would suggest, and what he does suggest, is that in order to really manage the transition well, we have to be aware of these other stages. And they don't always go in order. It's not always a linear process. It can be a bit messy, which is why we might start something and then feel like we're taking a couple of steps back. And I'll talk to you about some of the characteristics of these 3 different phases, and I think that idea that it's not always a linear process will make a little bit more sense. So what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to fold your arms. I'd like you to just fold your arms and put them across your chest and pay attention to which arm is on top and which arm is on the bottom. And now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to cross them again, but reverse them. So the bottom arm is now on top, and the top arm is on the bottom. And I just want you to sit with that for a minute. And it probably feels a little bit awkward. It probably feels a little uncomfortable, and it's almost as though you have to make an adjustment, or you can even do it with your thumbs. If you fold your hands and link your fingers together, and then pay attention to where your thumbs are, and then switch that. That feels really awkward to me. I'm always used to having my right thumb first and then my left thumb. And so when I think about change can be awkward and uncomfortable with something as benign as how we hold our arms or cross our fingers. So this is an opportunity just to point out how habituated we are to certain things that get us in our comfort zone. And sometimes even the smallest change can make us feel not only uncomfortable, but have this yearning to go back to the way it was. So typically when I do this workshop with a group of people, we do this change exercise, similarly to what we just did, but the way that we facilitate it is we have people find a partner, and then we ask them to face their partner and take a look at what their partner is wearing, how they put themselves together, and then we ask them to turn their back to their partner, and the instructions are to make 5 changes. And that when I ring the chime, I'm going to ask them to face their partner and see if they can identify all 5 changes. And so typically what happens is when people are in the process of making changes, things start flying off. Their watches come off, their belts come off, they take off earrings, they might take off a shoe, they might, they might cuff their cuff their pants or change where their ID badge is located. And in general, though, you start to see people take things off. And I also get a little bit of, well, what do you mean by making 5 changes? What kind of changes? A little bit of apprehension, a little bit of confusion. But when I ring the chime, people face each other, and they're usually able to identify the 5 changes. The next part of the exercise is I ask them to turn their back to their partner again and to make 5 more changes. And this is the time where I hear some grunts and complaints, or people rolling their eyes, or people saying, I don't have 5 more things to change. I can't do this. And I can definitely feel a bit of resistance, a little bit of frustration and agitation, and eventually people make 5 more changes, and they face each other, and they identify the 5 more changes. And I ask them to go back to their seats, put themselves together, and when I ask a show of hands, how many of you took something off, an overwhelming majority, probably 99% of the people, when I asked them to make 5 changes, took something off. And the reason being is that subconsciously, when we think about change, it often feels right away that it's a takeaway, that I have to give something up, that I'm having to lose something, that I have to make a sacrifice, that I have to do with less. And so people just start taking their glasses off, their watches off, whatever they can find that they can remove. And they're not even aware that they're actually doing that. And then when I ask them to make the 5 more changes, and I ask them to be honest about how many of you had an initial reaction of resistance or impatience or frustration, the hands go up, and I say, that's right, because I didn't give you any context. I didn't tell you why we were doing it. I didn't tell you the value in doing it. And oftentimes we feel like we're going through changes without enough information to make sense of it. And so it's harder for people to get on board with the request when they feel that there's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty in the environment. So none of those responses and reactions surprised me. When I ask them, how many of you changed partners? They look at me as though, I didn't know we could change partners. When I ask, how many of you just changed your attitude about it? They look at me quizzically. How many of you changed where you were standing in the room? How many of you added a partner? And what they start to realize is that they already have these self-limiting beliefs that they imposed on themselves about what they could and couldn't do during the change process. And again, sometimes we feel victim to change, and we create assumptions about it that aren't accurate, and we imagine things that don't really exist, or we create limitations that don't need to be there. So this exercise is one of those great experiential ahas, because I think at a really fundamental level, it gives us a chance to just react to change and take a look at how do I typically respond. Now, granted, I'm not trying to minimize changes in your organization. I know they're far more complex. I would just encourage people to think about, does this have to be a takeaway? Does this have to be something I have to sacrifice? Am I already predetermining certain limitations that might not really need to be there? So that's the change exercise. And I hope if you could envision as I was going through it, you could imagine how you might have experienced yourself in this situation. All right. So we've talked about changes, getting out of our comfort zone, some limiting beliefs that we might already have about it, some of the differences between change versus transition, which I think is really important for people to at least be able to honor and recognize. Yes, I'm on board with the change, but I really haven't transitioned there. Behaviorally, I'm doing what's asked of me, and the transition of my comfort, of my optimism about it is still lagging a little bit. That's not uncommon. So what do we need to do to start thriving with the change process? Well, if we follow Bridges' model, he talks about the first thing that we have to do is we have to acknowledge endings, that in order to move forward, we have to pay homage and be able to effectively deal with our endings. So the fact that people take things off, they're giving something up, it does often feel that endings are a loss. It could be that we're losing colleagues or patients that we're close to. It could be that we're losing, protocols or systems that we're really comfortable and familiar with. It could be that we're changing locations. That can be a huge stressor for people when they have been used to working in a certain facility or a certain wing and where they're working is changing. So those can all be situations that can feel like a loss to people. It's not uncommon that with those changes, people have certain emotional responses. So people can be rageful, they can be angry, they can be disappointed, they can be worried or confused, they can be pensive. So I think it's really important to honor that these are normal reactions and symptoms to going through a loss. And what Bridges suggests is that we really need to find an effective way to deal with our endings before we can effectively go forward, because if not, we're just going to carry that baggage with us as we go through the change. And I can imagine that all of you have had different experiences, or you've seen people that go forward, but they're really carrying a lot of baggage. They constantly refer to how it used to be. They have a hard time letting go of what was perceived as better in the old days or in the old ways. They might be so angry about the decision that it's hard for them to get on board with where they need to be. And just that idea that we do carry our emotions with us, so we need to find a way to work through them. So when organizations are going through big changes and they talk about the impact on the morale, the kinds of things that they might see of how people act is they could be apathetic, they could be resigned, they can be indifferent to what's going on, not participate. If they ask for ideas or suggestions, that people are reluctant to speak up. They might feel that people are sort of skeptical with their arms folded, with a wait-and-see attitude. It could also be that it can fracture trust, where people feel as though they were misled in some way. So it's normal to have a variety of reactions, and I need to add that there could be other reactions of excitement, of anticipation, of relief, of encouragement, of acceptance. I mean, it doesn't always have to be on the negative scale of the continuum. So some people really are what we call early adopters that embrace change enthusiastically, and they're the cheerleaders and the advocates. And so they might feel as though a great amount of respect for the vision of the company. So everyone will fall somewhere on this continuum, and we just want to find a way to acknowledge and normalize that process. All right, so we've got endings. And when we're going through major endings, let's see, at work, I'm going to go through this roller coaster ride with you and see if you can identify either where we'll just focus on you right now. See if you can identify where you might be on this continuum at any given time. So What if I lose my job? Well, that would create a lot of anxiety or apprehension for somebody if they don't know what the impact will be on them personally. What's the impact on me? How am I going to manage my personal life? What's this going to do if I lose my job and I don't have a steady source of income? How am I going to pay my bills? I would say for most of us that would create a high degree of anxiety and discomfort. Just how am I going to make ends meet? If I'm worried about thoughts on change in a workplace, will I be able to find another job in this market right now? Am I employable? How current are my skills? What am I doing to add value that I could demonstrate to a prospective employer why they might want to hire me? Now, I'm not encouraging any of you to be thinking that you're going to lose your job. This is just a general roadmap, if you will, of how people oftentimes respond to big changes and transitions in the workplace. Some people just feel it won't affect them. You know what, I'm insulated, I'm protected, or they're in denial. It could be that they don't realize what the impact will be, or they're too afraid to find out, and so they think that they're going to be just fine. Other people are refusing to accept the new way of doing things. I think, I was listening to some interesting stories on NPR about the challenges for medical practices to go to electronic billing, and what it means if they have to, the implications of having to invest a lot of money and resources to be able to be compliant. Well, they might initially have had a response of, I'm not going to accept this, and then they have to move to, I'm required, I'm mandated, I have to. And it's not uncommon, though, before that to have some resistance of, I don't want to accept this. Why am I feeling like this? Why am I feeling so distraught, so overwhelmed, so concerned? Why am I having such a hard time getting on board with this? What is my resistance about? And oftentimes we say what you resist will persist. That until you work through it, it still will be that little monkey on your back nagging at you about why you're feeling a certain way. When is this ever going to end? That continual event of change and transition, that it doesn't feel like there's an end in sight. It just feels as though I'm constantly having to go through one change after another. And people talk about the toll that it takes. They might say, for example, just when we were learning to get things done a certain way, then they implemented a new system, or I didn't even have a chance to develop my competencies at this, and now I'm having to learn something new. And people feel distressed over the fact that it feels as though the change will not end for them. Some people might really, really have an extremely difficult time and feel it's a personal vengeance with the company. I'm really hoping that nobody on the other line here feels that way. I'm just calling out that it's not, it can happen where people just get so embedded in negative thinking and reactive that that's their emotional state. Then you have some people that are optimistic about the process. Maybe this will mean there will be newer opportunities for me here. Maybe there will be promotional opportunities. Maybe I can talk with my supervisor or manager about how to take advantage of the new changes, identify a blueprint for moving forward. What skills might I need? What could this mean for me that would be positive? And then I'm going to be fine no matter what happens, whether I'm here or somewhere else. To focus on employability, to focus on adding value, to focus on what I do well, to focus on what I have influence over. And those are the people that are going to thrive with the process. And have been anywhere on this continuum at any given time when change and transition is being announced at your organization, and they're asking you to get on board with it. So this is just a general roadmap about how people might respond to knowing that there are endings in sight around change and transition. So it talks about this map anywhere from anxiety, depression, resistance, and despair, to finally getting to that place. That's the transitional piece around gradual acceptance. And it takes time to get there. It really takes time. And often what does happen is that people that are making the decisions about these really big, bold changes have had an opportunity to process it and discuss it and lead the initiatives and talk about it and make decisions for months in advance because of what's required before the information and the specifics are announced to the staff. And so it's not uncommon that there can be a gap around compressed time from those that have been working on the initiatives, working it, living it, breathing it, planning it, to when it's ready to be deployed and implemented, that the other people that are hearing it now for the first time, they also need time to digest, to process, to react. And I think it's important to be aware that there could be a potential time gap and to plan for that. So how do you get through these endings? It's important to be clear about what is finished and what's not. What questions do you still have? What needs to still be resolved? What issues need to be worked through? Not to just let those sit and fester, because what Bridges would say is that you're going to carry that forward with you as you continue to go through the other stages of change. Some people, it's really important to find a way to symbolically put closure to the past. So that could be, you think about memorial services or people creating photo images as a way to honor events that have happened in the company. What would that look like to symbolically put closure? Oftentimes when people are moving facilities, they need to have they want to have a going away party. They spend a lot of time in a certain place. They have lots of precious memories there. So for some people, symbolically putting closure to the past is really important. I think a lot of times when organizations go through change and transition, they don't have all the answers that employees are looking for. And I think being able to at least communicate what they do know and provide that information can be really helpful, even if it's not all the information. And your job is to know what information are you seeking? What questions do you need to ask? It doesn't mean that you'll get all the answers that you would hope for, or that you'll even get the answers. At least, though, you'll know that you're being proactive about seeking information and getting and making an effort to get the information available. Know that grieving is normal, and it's productive to do it in a way that allows you to honor and acknowledge whatever frustrations or losses or sadness that you might be feeling about change and transition. And that one thing that we can do is we can honor our successes from the past. We can be respectful of what we've done and use that as a way to help us move forward. So once we've gone through endings, the next part of the process is to go through the neutral zone. And I'd ask you to think about a time in your life where you went through a major change. For example, when you graduated high school and for the first time in your life, you're able to make a decision about whether you're going to go to college, whether you're going to get a job. And all you've known up to that point, for the most part, is being a student. And now you've got this big world open of opportunities and choices. And it can be a bit, for some people, disorienting. That's a time where there's a lot of ambiguity, a lot more questions than there are answers. Things are a bit ill-defined. You don't have a clear path. That's the neutral zone. It's what we call a period of disorientation. If any of you have had children, that time from when you were childless and then you become a parent, there's a bit of a disorientation when you become a first-time parent. Where's the rule book? Where's the instructions? Or how am I going to manage my life with this tremendous responsibility that I'm looking forward to and in awe of and a little bit overwhelmed by? So the neutral zone is that really gray, fuzzy zone. And for some people, they can hang out here for a while, and they're pretty comfortable in it. And for a lot of people, this is really difficult. They don't like having a lot of unanswered questions or a lot of strings that are untied. It can be a difficult time. And at the same time, it starts to create some, energetic juices flowing around creativity. It starts to channel that energy into thinking about what's possible. What do I want to create? And I think of it as having a lot more questions than answers. And when somebody starts to pull their answers together, they start to formulate a plan, they start to get an idea in place, then they've actually started to move through that neutral zone. So think about a situation where you are in an airport and you go to your boarding gate, and there's a sign that says, "This flight has been delayed," and that's all it says. Most people, or a lot of people, would react to that by being either concerned, annoyed, frustrated, irritated, and it would be hard for them to know, well, what do I do now? All I know is that the flight is delayed. And I think most of us that have flown can probably relate to that experience of feeling like we're in a holding pattern without a lot of answers, and it makes it hard to know, do I have time to go grab something from the store? Do I have time to make a call? Do I have time to get a couple of things that I needed at the newsstand? Or are they going to be boarding soon? I don't want to walk all the way down the corridor to get something to eat and then end up rushing to catch the flight. So now imagine this scenario. You show up at the boarding gate, and there's a gate agent, and he or she makes an announcement that says, "Our flight has been delayed by about 45 minutes due to some inclement weather from where the plane is coming from. You have plenty of time if you want to go grab something to eat or stop off at the newsstand. We anticipate that we'll be boarding in about 30 minutes, and we will make another announcement about 25 minutes from now letting you know of the status." Now, how do people respond to that? They might still be concerned that they might miss a connecting flight. They might even be a little bit annoyed. However, my guess would be that it wouldn't be anywhere near on the same scale as when they arrived at the situation where there was no information and they just had to figure it out. And the only difference in this situation, the flight is still delayed. The only difference in this information is the amount of information that was available and how it allowed people to move forward, to make plans. So think of that as, if I'm in the neutral zone and I have a lot of questions, once I start to get the information that I need, then I can rally myself together and get a plan and move forward. So the best way to thrive through the neutral zone is to help, if you're helping somebody else who you see is sort of stuck there, to be able to be compassionate and empathic and understand that it's a process, it's not a quick fix, to be able to provide information as best as you can, especially for those of you that are in a leadership role, that are emissaries of the administration, where you're being tasked to communicate these changes to your staff. Help them understand why this is an important change, what the benefits are, how will it be implemented, what is the time frame, what can people expect. I'd like to know, as an individual, what my role will be in it, what's expected of me, and how is it going to impact me. What will be different? What will be the same? So the more information that you can provide, the better off, the easier it is to effectively get through the neutral zone. Now, I know that it's hard to go forward with confidence in times of uncertainty. So a lot of this has to do with focusing on what I can influence, not what I don't have control over. So it's reasonable to ask for information. It's reasonable to know that some of the information might not be available just yet, and it's important for people to just be able to accept that and to be proactive about asking for updates, asking for what you can, what is available. I think that oftentimes in organizations, especially when they're going through big changes, in the absence of information, people make things up, and that doesn't mean that they always make things up that are correct. So take personal responsibility for how you choose to manage this time. What can you do? It could even be your own self-care around, what can I do to alleviate other stressors so that I can be more resilient at work? Are there things that I can change with my exercise or with my sleep? Are there personal goals that I can do? Do I need to have better balance right now so I don't feel all consumed? The more you can do to take care of yourself, the more emotionally resilient you'll be, which is allowing you to adapt and be flexible as you go through changes. What I really like about this chart is it helps us understand what's going on in an organization as we go through the change process. And what they suggest is that you need all of these ingredients of vision, motivation, knowledge, an action plan, and resources in order to implement and sustain a positive change. And if any one of these blocks is missing, then you're going to have you can anticipate a predictable response. So if we don't have the vision, then people are going to be confused why we're doing this. If we don't provide motivation, if we don't find a way to inspire people and get them engaged, it'll take a lot longer for the change process to occur. If we don't give people knowledge and skills that they need, if we don't give them the information, then that creates anxiety and uncertainty, and it can also create a fear-based culture. So are there training, such as the one that we're doing here, to help people normalize and inoculate themselves around the change process? If we don't have an action plan, if we don't have a blueprint, if we don't have actionable items and next steps, then it's not uncommon for the change not to occur and for people to be stuck in the same pattern. And if the resources aren't available, and that can mean time, money, expertise, staff, if we don't have the right resources available or enough resources available, then people can oftentimes get frustrated that they're on board and they're ready to implement and they want to do a good job, and they feel that their hands are tied in some way because they don't have the resources to be as effective as they would like to be. So, what I would encourage you to do is just do a quick audit and say, where do I have a vulnerability of something that I might be missing? So we've gone from endings to the neutral zone. So we've gone from a point in time where we might have a sense of loss or sadness to a place of fuzziness, of things being ill-defined and a bit confused, to beginnings. And if you think about the new year, which is right around the corner, people tend to be optimistic. It's a time of new commitments, of a sense of a fresh start, a new beginning. People are willing to make commitments to things. They're more confident. And it's an exciting time. Think about when you first got involved in a relationship with somebody and you had all those new feelings of excitement, or when you first started a new job and you were excited to make a contribution and find a good fit and be a part of a team. So beginnings are a time of a lot of high energy, and I think it's important that you can have this great idea, this great new beginning, to start to really hone it down to what do I need to do to create it. I need to figure out what skills do I have, what don't I have that I need. Are there any gaps in my ability to do this? Can I clearly tell somebody, do I have a 30-second elevator speech that if somebody asks me, what's my new charge, what's my new plan, I can clearly articulate it in a way that they get it. Have I given it that much thought? Have I identified people that I think would be good mentors, or somebody, do I want some executive coaching? Do I need some additional support? What services do I need to seek out? Are there classes to take? Are there courses that would be beneficial? What do I need to do to increase my foundation of knowledge and expertise and skills? I think that's really, really important. And then to know that this is a process, and so it's important to celebrate little successes along the way. So if I've identified a new career path, for example, let's say the organization is going through a change and I see a promotional opportunity, maybe the first step to celebrate is the fact that I've even identified it, and I've identified who to call, and I put a date in my planner when I'm going to outreach this person, or I have extended an invitation and took someone out to coffee or lunch to talk to them about it. So those are all successes to celebrate. It doesn't have to be, in fact, we really want to encourage people to be proactive about celebrating your successes, because that helps keep our enthusiasm and our traction going. So if we're in this period, and as I said, you might have a new beginning and a new idea, and then you go seek out information and you find out that you're missing certain things, you might feel like you're right back at that process again, where maybe you feel your balloon's a little bit deflated now. And it's not uncommon for you to have felt like you were in the beginnings, and man, now you're back to that neutral zone again, where you feel like you've got more questions than answers. That's why I was saying it's not always a linear process. So it's important to acknowledge these emotional reactions, that it might require just accepting that there are some things that are unknown and that will be that way for a while. I can't possibly anticipate what working with this new supervisor will be, or I can't possibly anticipate how all these administrative changes are going to impact how I manage my time, and just acknowledge that some of this is going to remain unknown until I actually can roll up my sleeves and get my hands on it. What social support do I need? Are there colleagues that have been through something similar? Are there people that are going through the same concerns? Is there a way that we can support each other? Do we want to try and meet once a week and have some conversation about what's going well and what can we do to address the things that aren't as stellar as we would like? Do I need to make some changes in my behavior? Do I need to, come in, I'm just making this up here, but would it be beneficial if I were to make sure that I take a lunch break so that I don't have my blood sugar drop and I get burnt out and feel like I'm vulnerable to compassion fatigue? Do I need to change something around my behavior that'll make me more resilient? Do I need to be willing to take that risk and have that difficult conversation, even though I'm apprehensive about it, because in the long run I'll be better off once I do? Do I need to have an attitude adjustment? Do I need to think about, you know what, I don't know if this is going to be completely positive, and I'm promising myself that I'm going to remain open-minded? Do I need to focus more on working collaboratively now and look at that as a benefit as opposed to working more independently? That could be both a behavioral and an attitudinal adjustment. What am I doing to enhance my own self-care? And oftentimes, those that are in the profession of caring for others can tend to neglect their own self-care. So this is a time to really pay close attention to that. And for those of us that really struggle with the process or really want to get some additional insight into the transitions, the stages of change and transition, your EAP is a great resource. Think of it as added value executive coaching. You don't have to have a deep-seated psychological problem to tap into the EAP, and that's what that benefit is there for. If there's anything that's disconcerting to you or stressful, distressing, then call, outreach somebody, and partner with somebody, a trained counselor, to help you navigate through the process. How we explain things to ourselves has a lot to do with how we respond to situations. So do a reality check. What's the language that you're using? Are you talking in terms of always or never instead of recently or seldom or occasionally or frequently? Are you able to explain things in the context of which they're occurring? Be clear about what's in your sphere of control versus what isn't. And then we want you to focus on what you actually have control over, which could be an area of concern or an area of influence. I think a lot of times people expend a lot of energy on things that they really truly have no control over. Doesn't mean they don't have influence, and they often lose sight of what the distinction is between the two. So when we talk about self-talk, think about, do I talk about things in terms of permanence, such as, always and never? Is it pervasive? Is it the entire organization? Or is it my department? Or is it this particular group of practitioners? And do I personalize things? Why does this always happen to me versus it's challenging for anybody at this stage in their career going through these types of changes? Or am I really personalizing it? So that's something you really want to pay attention to. All right. So when we talk about our circle of control, it really has to do with adopting a more proactive focus. So a lot of times people spend a disproportionate amount of focusing things on what they have concerns over. And our CEO once said to me, and I thought this was brilliant, if you have a problem and you know what to do about it, don't worry about it. If you have a problem and you don't know what to do about it, don't worry about it. And in a way, tongue-in-cheek, it was a bit liberating to think about how often do I tend to think of things and worry about things that I, really am not able to control. So if we focus a lot of our time and energy on things that we have concerns and see as problems, that we feel are being imposed on us, then it's easier for us to deflect the blame or diffuse the responsibility. instead of taking ownership over what we can actually do in those difficult and distressing times. So the invitation is to see if there's a way to redirect our time and energy to things that we can actually influence and make a difference on. So circle of influence. Can I think differently? Can I make attitudinal adjustments? Can I ask for social support? Can I engage in certain behaviors that I think will enhance my overall resiliency? And that allows me to take ownership. And that feels far more empowering to me. It could even be, can I find a way to be persuasive and compelling in sharing my thoughts with my supervisor about what my concerns are? Or can I be solution-focused instead of problem-focused? What would that conversation look like? So it's an invitation to look at your circle of control. I think making the distinction between control and influence is really, really important. And then look at these moments of choice. Do any of those resonate with you? Can I be less reactive and be more willing to be patient with the process? Can I listen more open-mindedly? Can I try and see this from the organization's perspective, from a more holistic point of view instead of just a departmental point of view? Can I notice when I get triggered? Are there certain things that I react to strongly? And is it because I have certain expectations and thoughts and beliefs? Think about how often do I say, well, they should do this or they shouldn't do that. There's an implied contract of beliefs that when we get frustrated it's because we feel somebody has violated my belief. You know, you might believe that all decisions should be democratic, and yet you're working in an organization where there's a different protocol around decision making. And so is that a trigger event for you? What can I do? I'm just looking at this list. You know, what are the distractions that are going on in my life right now that make it hard for me to focus? Or it could be, what are my filters that make it hard for me to focus on any appreciative benefits of this change? So this is a really nice checklist just to see, where do I have moments of choice where I can either choose to focus on what I can have influence over and move forward. So my colleague was planning to join us today, Danny, and unfortunately she couldn't be here. But I really want to thank you for your time and attention today on the change and transition process. I hope this has been helpful in terms of giving you an overview, understanding and normalizing the 3 different stages between endings, neutral zones, and beginnings, normalizing the feelings that go with each one of those stages, identifying some actionable items that you can do to thrive with change. And as a reminder, if you are struggling with it or you'd like some additional guidance and support around the process, to remember that your EAP is there to help facilitate. And I invite you, if you have any questions at all about what I've shared with you today, my email address is there. Please send me an email and I'd be happy to respond to you. So happy holidays and happy change and transition. Thank you so much for your time today.